possibly change the input and output variables, these names. Then we also have the submodel pane window. And this is where we can make changes to the model just as we did before we ever made the H-block. So the first thing I'm going to do is take this image here. I'm going to click on my drawing layer, select the image, and copy it. Select the image and hit Control-C to copy it. Go over here to my icon pane and paste it. Move it around. The other block is still there. I don't need it anymore, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that other default image. Move the connectors around. I'll let the people enter in this area. I'll let the people exit. Actually, I'll let the people enter up here. I'll move the connector around, and I'll move the connector here. Great. The connectors do not have to be on the outer edge, by the way. Usually that's a great place to put them, but it doesn't have to be there. The next thing I'm going to do is to put some animation objects on my image. That is done through this icon tools pop up here on the menu bar. The icon tools has an option to add an animation object. So I'll select the animation object, and I'll go ahead and draw a box here. So whenever there's one person waiting in the queue, that person's animation object will be displayed there in number 1. If there's 2 people in the queue, I'm going to go ahead and add a second animation object here. Then I will have 2 objects being displayed up there. And I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste the other 3. I'll put about 5 in here. I'll just go ahead and hit Control-C and Control-V, line them up neat. So now there's 5 animation objects. And the way that we'll use them is when I open up the queue and the activity are 2 blocks that have this feature that I use it on all the time. There is a tab called the Item Animation tab. Earlier, we'd use it to change the 2D pictures. But we can also use it to animate those H-block objects. So I'll animate this. Object number 1. We push it up to here. Guess what would be in the second spot? Anybody have a wild guess? If you guess 5, you are correct. I'm going to animate from object number 1 to object number 5. That 1 to 5 is going to look at these 5 animation objects. Now, if there's 7 people in the queue, not to worry. It will still hold the 7 people. It's just that the last 2 people, number 6 and number 7, will not be displayed in the queue. But it will animate the first 5. We'll go ahead and click OK. I'll go ahead and close this up and save it. Now I have to clean my lines up. Gotta have nice lines. So I'm just going to delete that, move it down. Line it up, move this up, and away we go. Let's see what happens here. Now, this activity has a capacity of 12, so it's going to take a few items before it actually gets full. Let me speed it up just a bit. Almost thought it was going to get full. Not yet, though. There we go. Now we're starting to see a few of them. So
it's a little hard to see on this end. It's kind of jumping around.
Okay. Next time it fills back up, I am going to pause the animation. But it might take a bit to fill back up. Almost got it. There we go. Now that I have it paused, okay, now that I have it paused, you will be able to see those objects waiting in the queue. Dave, do you see it now?
Yes. Yeah, no, that looks good.
Okay.
Since they were moving through so fast, it was a little hard to tell what was going on because the refresh on the display was a little slow.
So that's how we do it, simple as that. Now with the way, if you notice on the queue, these people are moving just like a waiting area. This guy, let's see this number 3, he's going to move up. Every time somebody leaves the queue, they're going to move up a spot. And we can follow those people as they move through the system. But this doctor area is a little bit different. Now, yes, we can open up the activity, go to the item animation tab, and it also has an option to animate the H block objects. And I could put, you know, if there's 12 rooms, I could animate it 1 through 12 in another H block. However, though, if I did that, you would see people moving from room to room to room. And normally, if you go to emergency room, once you get into a room, you'll stay in that room for the duration. So there's another way to do this. Let me go and open up my finished model, just like a cooking show. I have shown you the beginning. Now I'm going to show you the end. And I'll show you how it's done. So here's one where I put my hospital with emergency room with 12 rooms in it, and I'm animating on top. But what you'll notice is that when people leave, let me slow the animation down, and I will rerun it with a slower animation. You'll see that when people go into a room, they will not leave that room. They're going to stay into that room until they're finished. And let's take a peek how that's done. I'm going to open up the structure window first, and we should be able to see everything from the structure window. I do have my picture in here where I copied it and pasted it, just like I did with the waiting line. I drew 12 animation objects in here from this icon tools menu. But what I did was I used an activity block for each of those rooms. So this first activity block, if I look at the item animation, is only animating object number 1. Notice animation object number 1. My second H block, second activity block is animating object number 2, and only object number 2. My third one, you guessed it, it's only animating object number 3. So as the items are coming in, once it goes into an activity block, it will animate that and stay in that animation spot until the item is ready to leave the activity. So there's no jumping around for those objects. Now, the logic in how I put them into the room was simply routed them based on a random probability and gave them each an equal probability, so that it didn't really matter that they was using room 1 or room 5. It's just sorting them based on a random distribution. Okay. Any questions on that? If you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand. And Dave, if there's any questions, feel free to let me know.
There haven't been any questions so far, so, for you anyway.
Okay. Okay.
I have a question. How many people here have used the hierarchical block animation like that before? We don't have a poll on that, but just raise your hand. I can do a quick survey of that. It's about 4 out of the 10 people here, so about 40%. Okay, thanks, guys.
I do have another poll for you to go before we go on to the next session, the next topic. It's with the animate values, Dave. Could you bring out the question, do you use the animate value block?
Oops.
So if you would, I have a question on, do you use the animation value block?
We're up to 80%, so let's see where we go. Get one more person. There we go. It's like the public radio. They make you play. They need just one more person.
So most everybody use the animate value block. Great. Okay, Dave. So there's only a few that has not used it. Well, there's a couple of things I want to do with it. Now, I'll do it. I won't spend much time in it because it looks like most everybody has used it.
It looks like we got a question from Jeff Foley. Jeff, I've unmuted you. What's your question? I'm not hearing you, so you may want to type it in. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Robin.
Okay. Well, the next thing I want to do is show you a little bit about the animation value block. I am going to add, I have the same model, or a similar model, start out from the basics. Then I'm going to add a couple of animation value objects, a couple of things to use the animation value. One of them is going to be to animate a number, and I'll put the number right up there. So I'll animate the utilization of this activity. So we'll see how utilized the rooms are. And I'm also going to use another animation object, a level, which will look like a tank, that's going to display the same information, only it's going to be in a bar chart. So I've used the animation, the icon tools with the animation object to put 2 more objects up here to animate. I'm going to go ahead and close this structure window now that I have my animation objects. And again, what we'll look at, what we'll see is a bar chart very similar to this, as well as a value to pop up very similar to this on my other model. Close that up. Now, the way we'll add it, I'll use the animate value block from the animation library, the animate value block. The first one I'll put in here will be used to display a value. That's going to simply be a number I'll display. I will animate it at the end of the simulation so that no matter regardless of whether I have the animation on or off, oftentimes I want to see the value up there all the time at the end of the run. I'll also tell it to push to object number 1. The first object that I put up there was for the value. So this is the spot where I push it to object number 1. Again, I'll display a value. The color will be black. I'll animate at the end of the simulation, and I'll leave the font size at 9. If I close that and run it, you'll see it starting to populate as I'm running it, as well as when I turn the animation off and run to the end, it'll give me the animated value here, 82%. I run it again, 75%. So that's how we could see the utilization of the rooms without having to go in there and find the utilization value. This makes debugging and verifying and validating your model go a whole lot faster when you can bring those critical parameters up to the top of the H block. The other thing I want to show you, again, from the animate value block, I want to animate the same value just in a different way. In this case, I want to animate it a level. Animate by changing a level. So that's going to give me more like a tank that's going to display in there. The minimum value of the utilization is going to be 0. The maximum value that I expect coming out of the U connector is going to be 1. I will change the color. Let's pick out an interesting color here. How about blue? Let me animate it by changing it blue. I'll also animate it at the end of the simulation, and I will push it to object number. What object do you think this will be? Will it be 1 or 2 or what number? Yes, if you guess 2, you're correct. It is going to go to object number 2. If you recall, there's 2 objects here, and the second object, the one that has the 2 on it, because these objects will be numbered uniquely, the object number 2 is what I'm going to be pushing the level to. So I'll close it, I'll run it with the animation on, and you can see that tank there with the level increasing as the utilization is going there. So sometimes I present my utilization numbers as a number itself. Sometimes yeah, either one is appropriate. I have enough using the animate value. That's all I'm going to show there. But I have another poll question for you guys. I want to know how many of you use model functions to do your animation. Because you can also use model functions in an equation block or custom blocks to animate these objects.
Okay, there we go. We got everybody voting this time.
Okay, so most, the majority does not use the equation blocks to do that. Great. Well, let's take a peek at how we can do it. And I'm going to use the same thing. I'll use this exact same model, actually, to do the same animation, only using an equation block. The first thing I'll show you would be the animation level function. So we have the animation level function here. You'll see the animation object that I'm displaying here in the PowerPoint. And with the animation level function, it takes 2 parameters. The first parameter is the object number, which refers to this object number up here. The second number would be the utilization. So again, here's my code. I'll use the animation level function. The -1 refers to the object number. The utilization refers to the value that I'm trying to animate, in this case 50%. Now notice this -1. The -1 means I'm not going to animate on my block, like I don't want it to animate on the equation, but I want it to animate on the H block above me, on the H block that encloses the equation. So the -1 tells it to look above it and not look at the animation object on the equation block itself. Let's go ahead and implement that here. Actually, let me open up a, well, instead of using that one, I'm going to open up the solution. With this one, here we have the equation block. Look to the U connector, and the equation block has those 2 lines of code in it that I showed you. I'm animating object number 2, correct? And I'm animating the utilization value. So I'm getting the utilization from the connector, and I'm using it, I'm pushing it up to object number 2 on the H block using the animation level function. The animation show function, I would call that at the end just to say, go ahead and show that animation object. So there's actually just 2 lines of code. In addition to animation level, I also have to call animation show to push it up there. So that's all that needs to be done to animate this level. If I run it with the animation on, you will see that equation block pushing that level up. The next thing I'd want to do is use the animation text function. Let me show you the animation text function. Here's my H-block object. And in this case, I'm animating object number 1. And the function is animation text. I'm passing it the object number and the text that I want to animate. So in the case of the utilization, I'd be pushing up that utilization value. I'd use animation text, pass it -1. The negative refers to the H-block object, and the utilization refers to the value of 50%. That's the number that I want to animate. In the second case that I have down here, I'm actually wanting to push up some text, possibly to indicate when that machine or that process is off shift. So I can, under certain conditions, I might want to use the animation text function to push up that I am off shift. And I could just put in the text off shift into quotation. And that will animate on the top of the H-block. Okay, so let's see the actual equation for animation text. I am coming in here, I'm looking at the utilization. I have the animation text function here, but look what I have in front of it. I'm actually, with that utilization number, there are more decimal places in that utilization number, more than I would even want to count. See all those decimal places in that utilization number? So what I want to do, I want to call the function fixed decimal so that it takes that utilization number and trims it down to 2 decimal places. So I'm not seeing 0.3165, I'm only seeing 0.31. Then I'm using the animation text function to show that 0.31. So that's a good idea of when you have several functions to do to it, the equation block is a great way to do that. So now that you see this equation block, this animation object, I'm only displaying 2. And there's more things that you can do with it. For example, if I wanted to, instead of displaying 0.62, oftentimes I'll like to display 62 with a percent sign. Well, instead of doing adding up, putting together several value blocks to do that, I could take the utilization number and multiply it by 100. That would take the value of, in this case, 0.62, to change it to 62. And I could push up that 62 up here. And I might also want to add to it maybe a percent sign. So I'd use the plus function to concatenate that percent sign onto that utilization value. Let's see what that looks like now. Ah, look at that. Isn't that even better? Now, you could do that with the standard blocks, but again, if you have several functions to use, it's oftentimes better to do it with an equation block. At least it's a lot simpler, a lot more compact. But there's always ways to get around it. But that's one of my favorite ways. Okay. And Dave, how are we doing? Having any questions on that so far?
Yeah, actually, someone just asked, and I was going to respond privately, but I'll respond to everybody. If it was possible to use flash objects in ExtendSim and control them, and I don't think so. The only way you might be able to do that would be to actually, if there was a flash embeddable object, an ActiveX control that could display flash, and it had an object model that would work with that, you might be able to do it. But I don't know enough about flash to know how it works, whether or not that's possible. But so the answer is a definite maybe. It would definitely take some programming, but you could embed an ActiveX control that displayed the flash, and then assuming it has an object model that you can communicate to from ExtendSim, then you could do that. Now, you know, a lot of these times people ask me questions, can you? And the question really should be, how hard is it to? Because that'd be a bit of work to get all that going. But it's possible. And I don't know if there is an ActiveX control that displays flash or not. And if there is, there's a good chance it'll work in ExtendSim. So I'm sorry, that was kind of a long answer to a short question.
Okay. That was great, Dave. Thanks. Okay. Well, so let's review a little bit about the equations once again. I used the animation level function to animate a level. I also used the animation text function to display text, like the 0.5 for utilization. And you could also use the animation text function to display text itself. And I did that as well with the %. You can also change the color. There is a function here to change the color. For example, if we wanted the level or the text to be a different color, we could go to the color palette. And for example, if we wanted it blue, and we clicked on that blue on the color palette, it gives us 3 values at the bottom of it. The H, S, and V. I think that's hue, saturation. Actually, I shouldn't even say that because I have no clue. I always refer to it as H, S, and V. But with that, we could call the function animation color, tell it what object we want to change. We could pass in the H, S, and V colors. And again, we get those from the color palette. We also pass in the pattern. So like the solid color would be a pattern 1. And that would actually allow us to change our animation object to different colors, which is very helpful at times. So those are 3 of the functions that we've seen with the animation functions. There's also many more. You can animate circles, animate rectangles, lots of things that you can do. And again, we can also do some of those things with the animate value block. But the real benefit of using the equation is if you had several things to do with it, such as change the format of the number, oftentimes it's just easier to do it in an equation block. There's another feature that I want to show you that's really neat. That's, we saw it in this one. When I'm running this model, and if we want to, again, take a look at some of the animation objects in here, we covered animating the level. We covered animating values on top of H blocks like this. And the huge benefit of this is the important characteristics inside of that H block, I'm animating them on the top level. So I could see what's going on without having to dig into it, right? So on this front screen, I can see how every process is doing. Let me go ahead and pause this. Or the other thing to look at here is this, this stacked bar chart. Did you guys notice this stacked bar chart? Let me run it again so you can see from the beginning how it starts to wiggle as I'm running the model. Sometimes we might want to take this data out to ExtendSim and just plot it, or outside to Excel and plot it. But you can also use the animation poly function to do a stacked bar chart like I'm doing here. This is actually done with 2 equation blocks. I'm using 1 equation block to animate my legend, and I'm using 1 equation block to animate my stacked bar chart. And this stacked bar chart is simply a series of rectangles or polygons with 4 points on them being stacked together to match up the lead times. So I have a table in here that I'm reading for the lead times. So I'm putting the lead times in here with the description and the time that a patient spends in the triage, the registration, waiting room, doctor, and this is the average time. And my equation block over here is reading that table and animating it based on the values it finds. Let's open up this and see what it looks like. So here's my two equation blocks that I told you about. And here is my animation objects. I have some objects. If I move this over, you'll see that at the top of this chart, let me get things so that you can see them. Great. Okay, so you can see at the top of the chart, I have text to describe the admit, main ED patients and fast track patients. I'm showing up the total time, the total average time the patient spends in an emergency room if they're eventually going to be admitted in the hospital. Notice it's 664 minutes. So if patients are sick enough where they need to go into the hospital, usually they'll spend quite a bit of time in the emergency room. For someone going into the main emergency department, taking on average 305 minutes. That's being displayed with the value to that block. This 103, there we go. The fast track time is being displayed with this one. I have labels here. My legend, I'm using an equation block to push up those labels as well. That's animating a text from one set of objects and actually animating a rectangle with a specific color on another set of objects. But the animated bar chart, that's done with the series of animated objects here. There's 7 possible areas from triage to disposition. So I have 7 animation objects that represents the 7 stacked bars for each chart. For 7 for the triage, or I'm sorry, 7 for the fast track, 7 for the main ED, and 7 for admit. And let's take just a peek at how we do the animation objects for this. How we do the code. Let me open up my simple model that I'm using with the animation poly. I'm doing it here in this model. In this one, I'm using that same model that we had been working with, and I'm doing it to an object here. Here's the code that we use to animate that polygon. It's called animation poly. That's the function. I'm passing into it the object number. I'm passing into it the number of points that polygon should have, and I'm passing into it an array that contains those 4 edges, the coordinates for those 4 edges. So for this polygon, this top left corner has the coordinates of 0, 0. So my first 2 points into this array is for point ID number 0. The X coordinate is 0. The Y coordinate is 0. For my next point that I want to place on this polygon is point number 10, 0. The X coordinate is 10. The Y coordinate is 0. For the third one, that would be point ID here, point ID number 2, 0, 1, and 2. Its X coordinate is 10. The Y coordinate is 40. The last one here in the lower left, the X coordinate is 0. The Y coordinate is 40. And I'm taking that array and passing it into the function. So that is what's being used to animate the bar, the graph. So as my utilization is increasing, what am I changing in this array here, in this array structure? Well, I'm changing the height, this value of 40, As my utilization is increasing, I would be changing the height from, from possibly 0 to at the maximum it would be a 40. If I look at the equation for it inside of this area, let me open up the equation editor. I'm reading in from this equation the utilization, and I'm animating the height and the width, which is defined here. The height is based on the utilization, and the width I've set to 10. So as the utilization is increasing, the height parameter is increasing. And that is why it's changing on the animated object. So as the utilization is increasing, the height of that bar is increasing. Now, in the actual model that I have here, it's the same concept, only what I did with this one is the very top bar is for the triage time. I looked at the height of the triage time, and I knew that the registration should go on top of it. So if the top of one bar is going to be set equal to the bottom of the next bar. And I'm just increasing the bar as the model is running. Oops. Let me close this up. So as the model is running, it's looking at those values, the actual time. Oops, I think I messed something up. Oh, sorry. So as I get this running again, any questions on that one?
Not seeing anything. So feel free to raise your hand, and I'll mute you or type something in the question box.
Poly function that I have that was shown on the other model. Let me open that up again. On one of the other models that I had, the one that I first showed you guys, remember this one? Notice this clock up here at the top? Those hands are being animated with the animation poly function. And that's all done in one equation block. It's also being done, the executive can actually do that as well. But I pulled the code out and got it working in my own equation block. And so you can also use that same code in an equation block. And that's all being done in one equation using the animate poly function to animate where the hands should be at different times of the day, for both the hour hand as well as the minute hand. So that would be another good use of the animation poly function. So with that one, you could do a lot of stuff with the animation poly function. The possibilities are almost limitless. Okay, Dave. Are there any other questions that you guys might have? Feel free to raise your hand or text it, put it into the chat window.
So if there's nothing else, I'll end the session. Thank you very much, Robin.